The weight of loss pressed against my chest as I stood in Grandma Rose's kitchen, my fingers trailing across the worn formica countertop where she'd taught me to roll out pie crust 30 years ago. The house still held her scent, a mixture of lavender and fresh-baked bread that seemed to emanate from the very walls. 2 weeks after her funeral, and I still couldn't bring myself to change anything, not even the half-empty cup of tea she'd left on the windowsill the morning she passed. "You always were her favorite, weren't you, Alex?" Clara's voice cut through my reverie like a knife, sharp and accusatory. I turned to face my cousin, taking in her carefully styled blonde hair and designer outfit that seemed jarringly out of place in this humble kitchen. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, with her husband Roger hovering behind her like a dark shadow. "This isn't about favorites, Clara," I replied, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Grandma made her choices." "Did she?" Clara's perfectly manicured nails drummed against her arm. "Or did someone help her make them?" The implication hung in the air like poison gas. I felt my jaw tighten, the familiar surge of defensive anger rising in my throat. But before I could respond, Roger stepped forward, his expensive suit making him look more like a corporate raider than family. "Let's be reasonable here," he said, his voice smooth as oil. "The estate is substantial. Surely there's room for discussion." I watched him survey the kitchen, his eyes calculating square footage and property values rather than memories. This was the man who'd convinced Clara to sell her father's business barely a month after his death, turning a family legacy into quick profit. Now here he was, circling like a vulture over my grandmother's home. "The will is clear," I said firmly. "Grandma left the house to me." Clara's laugh was brittle. "Oh, the will. The one that mysteriously appeared just 3 months ago. The one that contradicts everything she ever told me about keeping the property in both family lines." My stomach clenched. This was the first I'd heard about any previous discussions. "What are you talking about? Don't play innocent, Alex. It doesn't suit you." Clara moved closer, her designer perfume overwhelming Grandma's lingering scent. "I have proof that Grandma intended to split everything equally between us. And I intend to make sure her real wishes are honored." Roger placed a hand on Clara's shoulder, but his eyes were fixed on me. "We're prepared to be generous in negotiations. After all, we're family." The word family in his mouth sounded like a business term, something to be leveraged and exploited. I gripped the counter behind me, feeling the edge dig into my palms. "There's nothing to negotiate," I said. "This house has been in our family for 3 generations. It's not a commodity to be carved up and sold off." "No." Clara's smile was razor-sharp. "Then maybe you should take a look at this." She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a thick manila envelope, dropping it on the kitchen table with theatrical precision. The sound echoed in the quiet kitchen like a judge's gavel. "What is that?" I asked, though something in my gut already knew. "Documentation," Roger answered smoothly. "Proof that the current will might not be as legitimate as you'd like to believe." My world tilted slightly on its axis. "Are you threatening me?" "Threatening?" Clara's eyes widened in mock innocence. "We're trying to protect Grandma's true wishes. The question is, Alex, why are you so desperate to prevent that?" I looked between them, my cousin who'd once been like a sister to me, and her husband whose ambition had slowly poisoned everything it touched. The kitchen suddenly felt too small, too warm, the memories it held tainted by their presence. "I think you should leave," I said quietly. "Oh, we're leaving," Clara replied, moving toward the door. "But this isn't over. Not by a long shot." She paused in the doorway, turning back with an expression that was almost pitying. "You know what the sad thing is, Alex? I actually thought you were different. That you actually cared about family." After they left, I stood in the silent kitchen, listening to their expensive car purr to life in the driveway. My hands were shaking as I reached for the envelope they'd left behind. Inside was a copy of what appeared to be an older will, dated 2 years ago, clearly showing the property split between Clara and me. But it was the handwritten note tucked behind it that made my blood run cold, a letter in my grandmother's distinctive script, dated just days before her death, expressing her desire to make changes to her final arrangements. Changes she never got to make. I sank into one of the kitchen chairs, the same chair where Grandma used to sit and tell me stories about our family's history, about the importance of keeping traditions alive. Now those very traditions were being wielded as weapons, and I wasn't sure if I was strong enough to defend them. The sun was setting outside, casting long shadows across the kitchen floor. In the gathering darkness, I could almost imagine I heard Grandma's voice, telling me one last story. But this time, I couldn't be sure if it was a story of legacy and love, or one of betrayal and loss. The manila envelope sat on the table like a ticking bomb, and somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew this was just the beginning. Clara and Roger weren't going to back down, and this quiet kitchen was about to become a battlefield. The only question was, how far was I willing to go to protect what Grandma had entrusted to me? The old will lay before me on Grandma's antique writing desk, its pages yellowed and dog-eared, a testament to time I hadn't known existed. My fingers traced the signatures, Grandma's familiar, elegant script, and the witnesses' names beneath. Each stroke of ink felt like an accusation, a whisper of doubt that burrowed deep into my consciousness. Sleep had become a distant memory since Clara's bombshell 3 days ago. The house, once a sanctuary of cherished memories, now seemed to watch me with suspicious eyes. Every creak of its ancient floorboards reminded me of the weight of disputed ownership pressing down on my shoulders. I'd spent hours poring over every document, every scrap of paper that might illuminate Grandma's true intentions. The desk drawers yielded their secrets reluctantly, old photographs, Christmas cards, grocery lists written in her increasingly shaky hand. Each item a piece of a puzzle I couldn't quite solve. The family dinner I'd planned for tonight loomed ahead like an executioner's blade. Clara had insisted on it, her voice dripping with false sweetness over the phone. "We need to clear the air," she'd said. "For the family's sake." The last words twisted like a knife, perfectly aimed at my deepest vulnerabilities. As twilight approached, I heard cars pulling into the gravel driveway. My hands trembled as I straightened my shirt, a sudden wave of nausea washing over me. The sound of car doors slamming echoed through the house like gunshots. Aunt Margaret arrived first, her face pinched with concern. She'd always been the family peacekeeper, but even she seemed at a loss now. Behind her came Uncle James, Clara's father, his usual jovial demeanor replaced by a grave solemnity that made him look decades older. "Alex," he said, embracing me stiffly. "We need to talk about this situation." Before I could respond, Clara swept in with Roger in tow, her entrance perfectly timed for maximum dramatic effect. She dressed for battle in a sharp black dress that made her look more like a corporate assassin than family. Roger's snake-like smile hadn't changed, but now I noticed how his eyes darted around the room, assessing, calculating. "I hope everyone's hungry," I said, forcing warmth into my voice. "Grandma's recipe for pot roast. Just like she used to make for Sunday dinners." "How fitting," Clara replied, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Considering we're here to discuss her legacy." The dining room felt like a courtroom as we took our seats around the heavy oak table. The same table where we'd celebrated countless Christmases and Thanksgivings, now transformed into a battlefield. Grandma's cherished china plates gleamed under the chandelier light, reflecting distorted versions of our tense faces. "I found something interesting today," Clara announced, waiting until everyone had served themselves before dropping her bomb. She pulled out a folder, sliding it across the table with theatrical precision. The original deed to the house, dated 1962. "Notice anything peculiar?" My fork clattered against the plate as I reached for the document. The yellowed paper crackled under my fingers as I unfolded it, revealing typed text that made my heart stop. The property had been jointly purchased by both branches of the family, Grandma and her sister, Clara's grandmother. This house, Clara continued, her voice carrying the practiced tone of a prosecutor, was meant to be shared. Always. Until someone convinced Grandma otherwise in her final months. That's not what happened, I protested, but doubt had already begun its insidious crawl through my mind. The old will, the deed, the mysterious letter, pieces of a puzzle that painted a picture I didn't want to see. Then explain this, Roger interjected smoothly, producing another document. A bank statement showing unusual transfers just weeks before the new will was drafted. Care to elaborate on those, Alex? The room spun slightly as I stared at the numbers. Large withdrawals from Grandma's account, dates that coincided with my visits. Visits where I'd helped her with errands, banking, doctor's appointments. Visits that now looked suspicious under the harsh light of scrutiny. This is ridiculous, I managed, but my voice sounded weak even to my own ears. I would never dash. Never what? Clara cut in. Never take advantage of a confused, elderly woman. Never manipulate her into changing her will. Never betray your own family. Each accusation landed like a physical blow. Around the table, faces I'd known all my life looked back at me with varying degrees of doubt and disappointment. Even Aunt Margaret, always my defender, seemed uncertain. Maybe, Uncle James said quietly, we should consider having a neutral party examine all the documentation. For everyone's peace of mind. The suggestion hung in the air like smoke, choking me with its implications. I pushed back from the table, the chair legs scraping against hardwood with a sound like a scream. Peace of mind. I laughed, the sound harsh and foreign. This isn't about peace of mind. This is about greed. About turning family against family. About destroying everything Grandma tried to preserve. Clara's expression shifted, something dark and triumphant flickering in her eyes. And what exactly was she trying to preserve, Alex? Her wishes? Or your manipulation of them? I stood there, surrounded by faces I'd known all my life, feeling like a stranger in my own home. The weight of their judgment pressed against me like a physical force, threatening to crush me beneath its mass. But somewhere in the depths of my despair, a spark of defiance ignited. Grandma's voice echoed in my memory, strong and clear, the truth always finds its way to the light, dear. Always. As I looked at the documents scattered across the dinner table like evidence at a crime scene, I realized this was more than a fight over property. It was a battle for truth, for justice, for the very essence of what family meant. And I was about to lose everything unless I could find a way to prove my innocence. The pot roast grew cold on the plates as the evening devolved into a maze of accusations and denials. But beneath the surface chaos, my mind had begun to work with desperate clarity. There was something I was missing, some crucial piece of evidence that would expose the real truth behind this sudden assault on Grandma's legacy. I just had to find it before it was too late. The aftermath of the family dinner left me wandering through Grandma's house like a ghost, each room a chamber of memories now tainted by doubt. In the pre-dawn darkness, I found myself in her study, surrounded by the accumulated wisdom of her 8 decades. The leather-bound books on the shelves seemed to watch me with quiet judgment, their spines a testament to a life lived with purpose and integrity, everything I now stood accused of betraying. My fingers traced the worn edges of her desk calendar, still open to the month she died. Each entry in her precise handwriting told a story: doctor's appointments, bridge club meetings, visits from family members. I paused at an entry from 3 months ago, meeting with Edward, will discussion. Edward Chambers, her attorney for over 30 years, a man who had guided our family through births, deaths, and everything in between. The revelation hit me with the force of a physical blow. Edward would know the truth about the will's creation. He would remember every conversation, every intention Grandma had expressed. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone, checking the time, 4:47 a.m. The world outside was still wrapped in darkness, but my mind blazed with desperate clarity. I spent the next hours constructing a timeline, spreading documents across the desk like pieces of an intricate puzzle. The bank statements Roger had so dramatically presented told only part of the story. Yes, there were withdrawals during my visits, but each one corresponded to a medical bill, a house repair, or a charitable donation, all documented in Grandma's meticulous filing system. As the sun began to paint the study in shades of amber, I discovered something that made my breath catch. In a folder marked "Personal," I found receipts from a private investigator, dated 6 months ago. The same period when Clara and Roger had begun making their frequent visits, expressing sudden interest in family history and estate planning. My grandmother, that brilliant, cautious woman, had been conducting her own investigation. But of what? Or whom? The sound of my phone ringing shattered the morning silence. Edward's office, returning my urgent message from hours ago. His secretary's voice was clipped, professional. "Mr. Chambers would like to see you immediately. He says it's regarding Rose Morrison's estate." The drive to Edward's downtown office felt like crossing a boundary between two worlds. Behind me lay the warm, memory-filled sanctuary of Grandma's house. Ahead loomed the glass and steel towers where truth would be measured in legal documents and sworn statements. Edward's office breathed old-world gravitas, dark wood paneling, leather chairs worn smooth by decades of anxious clients. The man himself rose from behind his desk, his face carved with concern. "Alex," he said, gesturing to a chair. "I've been expecting your call since the new will was contested." The words hit me like ice water. "You knew this would happen. Your grandmother knew." He opened a drawer, removing a thick file. "She came to me 6 months ago, deeply troubled. She'd overheard something that made her question certain recent, family developments." My heart thundered in my chest. "What developments? Perhaps you should read this first." He slid a sealed envelope across the desk. On the front, in Grandma's unmistakable handwriting, "To be opened only in the event of a challenge to my final wishes." The envelope felt heavy with the weight of revelations. As I broke the seal, my hands shook with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. The letter inside was dated just 2 weeks before her death. "My dearest Alex. If you're reading this, then my fears have been realized. The wolves are at the door, wearing the masks of family. I know you must be drowning in doubt and accusation right now. The burden I've placed on you is heavy, but you were always the strongest of us all, even if you didn't know it. What I'm about to tell you will change everything. The truth about Clara and Roger's sudden interest in our family legacy is far darker than simple greed. I've collected evidence, documents that prove their involvement in schemes that would break your heart and shake our family to its foundations. You'll find everything you need in the old hope chest in my bedroom, hidden beneath my wedding dress. The combination to the lock is the date we made your first pie together, you remember, the one that nearly burned down the kitchen. Be careful, my dear one. They're watching more closely than you know. Trust no one until you've seen everything I've gathered. And remember, the house isn't just property. It's a fortress protecting secrets that some would kill to keep buried. All my love. Grandma Rose." I looked up at Edward, my vision blurring. She knew. All this time, she knew they were coming for the house. He nodded gravely. Rose was many things, but naive was never one of them. She spent her last months building a case, creating a fortress of evidence to protect what matters most. "The house," I whispered. "No, Alex." Edward's eyes held mine. "The truth. The house is just the battlefield they've chosen. The real war is about something far more valuable, and far more dangerous." As I left Edward's office, clutching Grandma's letter like a lifeline, the morning sun had transformed the city into a maze of light and shadow. Somewhere in that house, hidden beneath layers of memory and tradition, lay answers that would either save or destroy my family. The hope chest waited, guardian of secrets that had already cost one life. The question was, How many more would those secrets claim before the truth finally emerged from its chrysalis of lies? The drive back to Grandma's house became a journey through the landscape of my own unraveling certainties. Each familiar street corner seemed to mock my previous blindness, while the weight of the letter in my jacket pocket pressed against my chest like a brand of truth. The morning sun painted everything in harsh relief, stripping away the comfortable shadows where I'd hidden from reality for so long. My hands trembled as I inserted the key into the front door, aware that I was crossing a threshold into territory that could never be unclaimed. The house's silence held a different quality now, not the peaceful quiet of cherished memories, but the pregnant stillness of secrets waiting to be born. The stairs to Grandma's bedroom creaked beneath my feet, each step an accusation of my ignorance. How many times had I walked this path, never suspecting that beneath the familiar surface of family dynamics lay a serpent's nest of deception. The hope chest waited in the corner of her room, its dark wood gleaming with decades of polish and purpose. The combination, that day in the kitchen, when smoke billowed from the oven and Grandma's laughter rang out like bells. October 12, 1993. My fingers moved over the lock with reverent precision, each number a testament to the bonds that transcended mere blood relation. The chest's hinges protested as I lifted the lid, the scent of cedar and preserved memories rising like incense. Grandma's wedding dress lay on top, ivory lace yellowed with age but still beautiful in its delicate strength. Beneath it, wrapped in layers of tissue paper, I found a metal strongbox, modern, incongruous among the vintage treasures. The key was taped to the bottom of the chest's lid, along with a note in Grandma's hand: "Truth is a weapon, Alex. Aim carefully." Inside the strongbox, I discovered a world of carefully documented betrayal. Bank statements showing systematic embezzlement from Clara's father's company before its sale, with Roger's fingerprints all over the transactions. Photographs of clandestine meetings with known corporate raiders. But it was the USB drive, labeled simply RNC Conversations, that turned my blood to ice. My laptop whirred to life, its screen casting a ghostly glow in the dimming afternoon light. The audio files were dated, organized with Grandma's characteristic precision. I clicked on the first one, and Roger's smooth voice filled the room. "The old lady's getting suspicious. We need to accelerate the timeline." Clara's response came through clearly: "She's not an idiot, Roger. Push too hard and she'll change everything, not just the house arrangement. We can't afford to wait. The merger goes through in 3 months. Without clear title to that property, the whole deal falls apart. Your father's company was just the beginning, this is the real prize. And Alex? He's not just going to walk away." Roger's laugh sent chills down my spine. "Everyone has a pressure point. We just need to find his." The conversation continued, each word driving home the magnitude of their betrayal. The house wasn't just property, it was the linchpin in a massive development deal. The surrounding neighborhood, the historic district, everything would be demolished to make way for luxury condos. My father's company had been sacrificed as a stepping stone, and now they were coming for the heart of our family's legacy. I sat in the growing darkness, surrounded by the evidence of calculated malice. The Alex who had walked into this room, uncertain, defensive, wounded by family accusations, was dissolving like morning mist. In his place, something harder was crystallizing, tempered by the heat of revelation. My phone buzzed, a text from Clara: "Emergency family meeting tomorrow. 7 p.m. Non-negotiable. Bring your lawyer." I stared at the message, seeing beneath its surface demands to the desperation lurking in its subtext. They were moving faster now, forced by circumstances I was only beginning to understand. But they didn't know about the strongbox, about the evidence that would shatter their carefully constructed plans. The question was, how to use it. Grandma's warning echoed in my mind: "Aim carefully." A direct confrontation would force their hand, potentially destroying any chance of preserving what truly mattered. But playing their game, matching deception with deception, meant becoming something I'd always despised. I reached for my phone again, this time to call Edward. His voicemail greeting played, but I hung up before leaving a message. This wasn't a decision I could delegate to legal wisdom. This was about more than justice or property rights. This was about legacy, not just of buildings and land, but of character and truth. The setting sun painted Grandma's bedroom in shades of blood and gold. In the mirror above her dresser, I caught a glimpse of my reflection, a stranger with hard eyes and set jaw, barely recognizable as the man who had stood in this same spot countless times before. The transformation frightened me, but beneath the fear lay a bedrock of certainty. Tomorrow's meeting wouldn't be an ambush, it would be a reckoning. And like Grandma before me, I would make sure the truth served its purpose, no matter the cost. I carefully repacked the strongbox, each document and recording a bullet in the chamber of justice I was preparing to load. The weight of responsibility settled around my shoulders like a mantle, heavy but oddly comforting. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt truly worthy of the legacy Grandma had entrusted to me. The house creaked and settled around me, its secrets now shared, its purpose clear. Tomorrow would bring its own battles, but tonight, in this room where generations of my family had faced their own crucibles, I began to plan my defense of not just property, but principle. Dawn found me in Grandma's garden, where frost-kissed roses stood like sentinels against the approaching winter. The morning air carried a bitter edge that matched the steel now forged into my spine. I'd spent the night constructing my strategy, each piece falling into place with the inexorable precision of a triggered trap. The evidence in the strongbox had transformed me. Where once uncertainty had clouded my purpose, now clarity burned like a flame, illuminating the path forward with merciless precision. The Alex who had floundered in defensive confusion was gone, replaced by a man who understood that sometimes victory requires dancing with shadows. Edward's voice crackled through my phone, heavy with concern. The meeting tonight, it's a power play. They're bringing Harrison Wells as counsel. The name landed like a body blow. Wells, the shark who'd orchestrated the hostile takeover of 3 historic districts in the past year. His involvement confirmed everything. This was never about family legacy. It was about demolition and development, about erasing history for profit. Let them bring their shark, I replied, surprised by the calm in my voice. We have something better than legal expertise. Alex, Edward's tone carried a warning, whatever you're planning dash. We'll be perfectly legal, I assured him. Just make sure you're recording everything. And Edward? Bring the files on the Madison Street development project. The mention of that failed venture, Roger's first attempt at neighborhood demolition, brought a weighted silence to the line. Then, understanding, you're going to force their hand. No, I corrected, watching a rose petal fall and spiral in the morning breeze. I'm going to let them force their own. The day unfolded like a slow-motion chess match. I made calls, each one a piece moved with deliberate purpose. To the Historical Society, requesting emergency landmark status documentation. To Uncle James, asking innocent questions about the company's final audit. To the Neighborhood Association, expressing concern about recent surveyor activity. Each inquiry would filter back to Clara and Roger, creating a web of uncertainty about my knowledge and intentions. Let them wonder, let them worry. Doubt is a poison that makes the guilty careless. By late afternoon, the house had become a fortress of preparation. I'd positioned Grandma's evidence strategically, some pieces visible as warning shots, others hidden as tactical reserves. The dining room, where so many family memories had been made, now felt like a war room. I stood before the mirror in Grandma's room, adjusting my tie with hands that no longer trembled. The face that looked back at me bore little resemblance to the man I'd been just days ago. In my eyes, I saw echoes of Grandma's strength, not the soft comfort of her love, but the steel beneath it that had guided her final actions. You were protecting more than property, I whispered to her memory. You were protecting truth itself. The doorbell rang at precisely 7 p.m. I descended the stairs with measured steps, each footfall a heartbeat in the rhythm of approaching confrontation. Clara entered first, her confidence brittle as thin ice. Roger followed, flanked by Harrison Wells, whose predatory smile faltered slightly at the sight of Edward already seated at the dining room table. "Before we begin," I said, gesturing to the chairs, "I thought we might review some interesting historical documents I've discovered." Roger's hand twitched toward his briefcase. "We're here to discuss the contested will, nothing more." "Oh, but it is more." I laid out the first piece of evidence, photographs of their secret meetings with developers. "So much more than a simple family dispute." Clara's face drained of color as she recognized the images. "Where did you dash?" "Grandma was thorough," I cut in, my voice carrying the weight of certainty. "Very thorough. But then, you already knew that, didn't you? It's why you've been moving so quickly, so desperately. The merger deadline is approaching, isn't it? The one that requires clear title to not just this property, but the entire historic district." Wells leaned forward, his expensive suit creaking. "These accusations are baseless dash. Like the accusations against me." I withdrew the USB drive, placing it carefully on the table. "Shall we listen to some conversations about accelerated timelines and pressure points?" The room crackled with tension as understanding dawned in their eyes. Every card they'd planned to play now lay revealed as the desperate gambits they were. But it was the final document I placed on the table that drove the nail into their coffin, Grandma's detailed account of their attempted manipulation, notarized and dated. "This isn't just about a house anymore," I said, watching their carefully constructed facade crumble. "This is about legacy, the kind that can't be measured in square footage or profit margins." Roger stood abruptly, his chair scraping against hardwood. "You have no idea what you're doing. The forces behind this development dash. We'll be very interested in the paper trail you've left," Edward interjected smoothly. "The Madison Street irregularities alone." The trap had sprung, each piece falling perfectly into place. But as I watched Clara's face crumple with the realization of defeat, I felt no triumph, only a profound sadness for what greed and ambition had destroyed. The night stretched ahead, full of legal discussions and negotiations, but the war had already been won. Not with accusations or threats, but with the quiet power of truth carefully deployed. In the darkness of Grandma's garden, the roses stood witness to justice served not through vengeance, but through the patient revelation of light. In the aftermath of that decisive night, victory tasted different than I'd imagined, not sweet, but complex and bittersweet, like aged wine that carries notes of both triumph and loss. The legal machinery ground forward with inexorable precision. Roger faced indictment for fraud, the development deal collapsed, and Clara retreated to her mother's house in Arizona, leaving behind the wreckage of broken trust and shattered family bonds. I stood in Grandma's garden, where autumn's first frost had claimed the last roses, their petals scattered like memories across the weathered flagstones. The morning sun cast long shadows through bare branches, and I found myself thinking about the nature of inheritance, not just the physical legacy of property and possessions, but the deeper birthright of truth and justice that Grandma had defended until her final breath. The house creaked and settled around me, its familiar sounds now carrying new meaning. Each room held echoes of the battle that had transformed me from a man defending property into something altogether different, a guardian of legacy, a keeper of truth. The weight of that responsibility settled across my shoulders like a mantle, heavy but no longer crushing. Uncle James appeared at the garden gate, his face weathered by the storms of recent revelations. The discovery of Roger's systematic destruction of his company had aged him visibly, but there was a clarity in his eyes that spoke of painful wisdom hard-won. "I never thanked you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "For exposing the truth, even when it hurt." I studied his face, seeing beneath the surface pain to the bedrock of integrity that had survived betrayal. "Some truths have to hurt before they can heal." He nodded, understanding the cost of that knowledge. We stood together in the garden's winter-stripped honesty, two men changed by the crucible of family crisis. The silence between us held none of its former awkwardness. We had earned this peace through fire. Clara called, he said finally. She's filing for divorce. Says she never knew the full extent of Roger's plans. The news stirred complicated emotions in my chest. My cousin's face flickered through my memory, not the hard-edged antagonist of recent weeks, but the little girl who had once shared ice cream cones and secret dreams in this very garden. Do you believe her? I believe she lost her way, he replied carefully. The question is whether she can find her way back. The words hung in the crisp morning air, heavy with implications of forgiveness and redemption. I thought of the evidence still locked in Grandma's strongbox, the full record of deception and manipulation that could ensure Clara never recovered from this fall from grace. But Grandma's final letter whispered in my memory, "The truth is a weapon, Alex. Aim carefully." Perhaps the true test of strength wasn't in victory, but in how we wielded its power. I made my decision, feeling the rightness of it settle into my bones. Tell her the house will always be her home too. When she's ready. Uncle James's eyes filled with unexpected tears. Your grandmother would be proud. We walked together through the garden, past the dormant roses that would bloom again in spring. Inside, I began the slow process of healing the house's wounds, not erasing the evidence of battle, but incorporating it into the fabric of our family's story. The formal dining room, where final confrontations had played out like Greek tragedy, now hosted Sunday dinners again. Slowly, tentatively, family members returned, drawn not by obligation, but by the promise of authentic connection built on honest foundations. Aunt Margaret brought her famous apple pies. Uncle James shared stories of Grandma's younger days, filling in the gaps of our family history with tales of triumph and resilience. Even Clara's children visited, their laughter echoing through rooms that had known too much silence. Late one evening, as autumn deepened toward winter, I found myself in Grandma's study. The strongbox sat open on her desk, its contents spread before me, evidence of darkness now transformed into testament of light. One by one, I fed the most damning documents into the fireplace, watching secrets turn to ash. Not to hide truth, but to make room for new stories to be written. The house settled around me, its ancient timbers holding centuries of family history, joy and pain, triumph and betrayal, all woven into the very foundation of who we were. I felt Grandma's presence then, not as a ghost, but as a continuation of purpose. I understand now, I whispered to her memory. The house was never just a structure to defend. It was a sanctuary to preserve, a fortress of truth where healing could begin. Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall, covering the garden in a blanket of pristine white. Nature's own way of saying that even the darkest soil can support new growth, given time and tender care. I stood at the window, watching darkness give way to dawn, feeling the mantle of legacy settle into its final form, not a burden to bear, but a light to carry forward. The battle was over, but the real work of rebuilding, of crafting something stronger from the shards of what was broken, had only just begun. And in that moment, surrounded by the ghosts of yesterday and the promises of tomorrow, I finally understood the full measure of my inheritance. It wasn't just a house, or truth, or even justice. It was the wisdom to know that the greatest legacy we can leave is not what we defend, but what we choose to build from the ashes of our hardest battles.